I woke to expensive coffee and sunrise secrets. My CEO wore my shirt, holding my silence. Last night blurred titles. Fear pressed close, yet my heart chose her, this forbidden morning refusing to end forever inside. If you like this story, then press like button and tell in comments where from you watching. For more emotional and romantic stories, press subscribe button, watch till end, thanks. At work, I learned how to disappear. Not in the dramatic way, no sudden exits, no slammed doors, but in the quiet erosion of presence. I arrived early, left early. I spoke when spoken to. I wore neutral colors that blended into glass walls and spreadsheet grids. In meetings, my voice was a line item, not a headline. People remembered my work, rarely my face. By 6 o'clock, I was already packing up. Not because I lacked ambition, but because my ambition had a smaller heartbeat and waited behind a daycare gate with paint-stained fingers and eyes that searched only for me. Every evening, I raced the clock, the elevator, the traffic lights. Every evening, I won or lost by minutes. Whispers followed me like a draft. Single dad. Poor guy. Must be hard. Pity sounds gentle until it's sharp. No one asked why I never joined happy hour. No one asked how I learned to braid hair with trembling hands or cook pasta without burning it. They didn't see the notes taped inside my wallet, reminders for school events, doctor visits, promises I refused to break again. On my desk sat a photograph. My daughter, grinning, 2 teeth missing, holding a paper crown she'd made herself. I kept it taped there like a talisman, edges curling with time. A fragile promise, I will come back. I always will. I didn't know she had noticed it. The CEO noticed everything. She moved through the office like weather, subtle, inevitable, impossible to ignore. Her heels clicked with certainty. Her gaze carried weight. When she entered a room, conversations adjusted themselves around her presence, like gravity recalibrating. I never looked at her for too long. Looking invited questions. Questions invited complications. But sometimes, I felt it, the pause. Not on my face. On my habits. She noticed how I flinched when co-workers joked about free time, how my smile faded at the word weekend. She noticed the way I kept my phone face down during meetings but checked it the moment we adjourned, as if something precious might vanish if I didn't. She never spoke to me. CEOs didn't do that. And I was grateful. During the day, she was a title. At night, she became something else. I didn't know that yet. At night, my world shrank to bedtime stories and soft lamplight. Rain sometimes traced quiet lines down the window as my daughter fell asleep clutching my sleeve, afraid of dreams she couldn't yet name. When she finally slept, I sat on the edge of the bed longer than necessary, listening to her breathing, convincing myself the silence was earned. Only then did loneliness knock. Not loudly. Politely. Like it had all the time in the world. That night, after dishes and folded laundry and the ache in my shoulders settled into something manageable, I opened a dating app I downloaded months ago and never used. No expectations. No photos carefully staged. Just truth, stripped down. Single father. Busy. Honest. Learning how to start again. I almost closed it. Then a profile appeared. No filters. No glamorous angles. Just a woman with tired eyes and a smile that looked like it had survived disappointment and decided to try again anyway. We matched. No fireworks. Just quiet recognition. We agreed to meet at a cafe far from the city center, neutral ground where nobody went to be seen. When I arrived, rain was tapping the windows like impatient fingers. She was already there, hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't touched. She looked different without the armor. No sharp lines. No polished distance. Just a woman in a soft coat, hair slightly undone, eyes searching the room the way mine always did, carefully. We didn't exchange last names. We talked about time, how it slips away, how it demands payment. We talked about mistakes that still left bruises and hopes that felt embarrassing to admit. When I spoke about my daughter, my voice betrayed me, softened. I didn't stop it. She listened like it mattered. That broke something open. Outside, the rain thickened, blurring the streetlights into watercolor streaks. Inside, warmth gathered between us, unplanned and fragile. When she laughed, it wasn't loud. It was relieved. By the end of the night, the cafe was closing, chairs stacking like punctuation marks signaling an ending. She hesitated, fingers brushing the edge of the table, then looked at me with a question she didn't ask aloud. "Do you want to come over?" she said instead. Not as a CEO. Not as a boss. Just as a woman who didn't want to sleep alone. I followed her into the rain, unaware that by morning, titles would return, heavy, unforgiving, and that everything quiet between us would become dangerous. The storm watched us leave, keeping our secret. She woke up before I did. I only know this because later, much later, she told me how panic surged through her first, sharp and instinctive, like a reflex she'd perfected over years of control. How her hand had hovered above the edge of the bed, unsure whether to stay or disappear. How the room felt unfamiliar and yet strangely kind. In that moment, while I slept, I was unguarded. No schedules etched into my brow. No deadlines pressing into my chest. No weight of being everything for someone else. Just breath, slow and even, rising and falling like a tide that finally trusted the shore. She watched me like that. She said my face looked younger in sleep. Softer. Like a man who hadn't learned yet how expensive love could be. I didn't hear her thoughts. I didn't see her fear. All I knew was the warmth beside me and the faint sound of morning, traffic humming somewhere far away, a sparrow daring the quiet, the city waking without asking permission. When she stood, the bedside, a small sound that felt like goodbye even then. She found my shirt draped over the chair, the one I'd worn the night before, wrinkled, ordinary, unimportant until she lifted it. She slipped it over her shoulders, sleeves swallowing her hands, fabric brushing bare skin. She breathed in without thinking. It smelled like soap and late nights and something steadier than she was used to. Safe. That word startled her. In the kitchen, light spilled in like forgiveness. My apartment wasn't impressive, no art on the walls, no design magazine touches, but it was clean, lived in, honest. A child's drawing was taped crookedly near the fridge, edges frayed. A small crack ran through the window pane, sealed with clear tape and stubborn hope. She noticed everything. She found the coffee before I did, fingers moving with certainty, measuring without measuring. The machine hummed to life, a low promise, and the scent bloomed, rich, deep, unhurried. It filled the apartment with something I hadn't realized was missing. I woke to that smell. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming. Because dreams are cruel like that, they give you what you want in perfect detail, then steal it before you can ask questions. I opened my eyes. Sunlight stretched across the room, pale gold and soft, touching her hair, her bare legs, the oversized shirt that belonged to me and suddenly felt like it had always been hers. She stood near the window, coffee cups in her hands, looking like a woman who had stepped out of another life and hadn't yet decided which one to return to. My heart stopped. Not fluttered. Not raced. Stopped. Because recognition is a kind of impact. Silent. Violent. She turned at the sound of my breath catching. Our eyes met, and in that instant, two realities collided, the quiet woman from the cafe, and the CEO whose presence could empty a room with a glance. The word slipped out before I could stop it. My employee, she finished for me, voice low, steady, already retreating behind glass. The cups trembled slightly in her hands. Silence dropped between us like a curtain. It wasn't awkward silence. It was catastrophic. The kind that redraws maps. The kind that erases the night before and leaves only consequences behind. This wasn't supposed to happen. I saw it in the way her shoulders straightened, the way her mouth firmed into a line I recognized from board meetings and press photos. Armor sliding back into place. CEO returning to her throne. I should go, she said, already turning, already becoming untouchable again. This was a mistake. A mistake. The word hit harder than I expected. I sat up, sheets pooling around my waist, heart pounding with a panic I hadn't felt since the night my world had split in two. Since the night I'd learned how fast love could leave. Wait, I said. Not loud. Not desperate. Just honest. She stopped. I didn't know what words would save us, if any existed. So I chose truth. The kind that costs something. I'm a single dad, I said. I don't get many nights like that. I don't get to pretend. I can't afford games. She didn't turn around. But last night mattered to me, I continued, my voice unsteady now. I don't know who you are at work. I didn't know. But I know who you were with me. Stillness. The coffee machine clicked off behind her, loud in the quiet, like a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence neither of us wanted to finish. Slowly, she turned. Her eyes were wet, not with tears, but with something unshed. Something dangerous. So did you, she said softly. Matter. We stood there, the truth between us, fragile and exposed. We talked then, not about policy or power or what this could cost, but about what it already meant. How the world would see it. How it would break us open if it came out wrong. How we were both tired of being wanted for the wrong reasons. One rule emerged, unspoken at first, then named because it had to be. No one could ever know. The decision felt temporary and permanent all at once. She left soon after, the shirt folded neatly on the chair, coffee untouched, like an offering neither of us dared accept. At the door, she paused, fingers brushing the frame as if memorizing the shape of it. I'll see you at work, she said. And then she was gone. The apartment felt smaller without her. Quieter in a way that hurt. At the office, we were strangers. I watched her through glass walls and mirrored reflections. She never looked at me for more than a second. In meetings, her voice was composed, distant. Mine stayed neutral, professional, contained. We passed each other in hallways like ghosts who shared a memory no one else could see. It was torture. And it was intoxicating. Our nights became careful. Dinners far from the city, where no one recognized her and I could breathe. Late-night calls whispered into pillows after my daughter fell asleep, her voice softened by the dark. Messages that said everything by saying very little. At work, stolen smiles that meant everything and nothing at once. Once, I found a letter slipped into my notebook, no signature, just a line written in careful ink, "You look tired today. Don't forget to rest." I kept it folded in my wallet, next to the photo of my daughter. Outside, autumn arrived, leaves falling like quiet confessions. Inside, something was growing, slow, dangerous, beautiful. And every morning, when I smelled coffee, my heart asked the same question. How long could a secret survive daylight? At work, we were strangers. Not the polite kind, the dangerous kind. The kind that stood inches apart in elevators and pretended gravity wasn't pulling us together. The kind that shared oxygen and silence like a secret handshake no one else could see. In the elevator, she faced forward. Always forward. Her reflection stared back from polished steel, flawless and unreadable. I stood behind her, close enough to notice the faint tremor in her breath when the doors closed. Close enough to smell her perfume, something subtle, restrained, like a memory that refused to announce itself. We never spoke there. Words would have cracked the glass. In meetings, I was careful. My voice was even, my eyes disciplined. I spoke only when necessary, never lingering on her face even when she addressed me directly. I called her by her title. She called me by my last name. Every syllable was a boundary we built together. It was torture. And it was intoxicating. Because restraint sharpened everything. At night, the rules dissolved. She called after my daughter fell asleep, her voice softened by darkness, by distance. The first time, she didn't speak for a few seconds, just listened to the sound of my apartment, the hum of the refrigerator, the quiet that used to feel like abandonment and now felt like anticipation. "Read to her," she said once, almost shyly. "I want to hear." So I did. I held my phone in one hand, the book in the other, and read about brave rabbits and gentle giants while my daughter curled against my side, half asleep. On the screen, she watched with an expression I had never seen on her face before, something like wonder, something like grief. Afterward, she wiped at her eyes and laughed it off. "I didn't know men like you still existed," she said lightly. I wanted to tell her I hadn't known either. That loss had carved me into this shape. That love, once broken, had taught me how to be careful with what remained. She started learning small things for us. How to braid hair. How to tie tiny ribbons. I caught her once, late at night, practicing on a mannequin head she bought online, frustration etched across her brow. She sent me a photo with the caption, "I'll get it right before I meet her." I stared at that image longer than I should have. No one had ever tried this hard to belong in my life. She laughed more then, real laughter, unguarded, the kind that startled her mid-sentence because she wasn't used to hearing it from herself. She told me about the pressure that never slept, about the way leadership demanded pieces of her soul and never returned them. About dinners with men who saw her as a trophy or a ladder, never as a person. "I'm so tired of being impressive," she confessed once, voice barely above a whisper. I saw her then, not the CEO, not the woman in tailored suits and headlines, but the lonely girl behind the title, carrying the weight of thousands while feeling utterly alone. And she saw me. Not just the single dad, not the employee who left early, but the man who still flinched at certain songs, the man who folded laundry with military precision because chaos once took everything from him. She saw the scars I never named. We weren't just dating. We were healing each other in stolen hours and quiet truths. But secrets demand payment. It started small. A pause in conversation when she entered a room. A lingering look from a board member when I spoke. An HR email framed as a routine check-in. The walls didn't close in all at once, they crept, inch by inch, like fog. One afternoon, I noticed a painting outside her office, a new one. Abstract. Storm colors. Two figures blurred together at the center, almost touching, almost apart. I wondered if it was coincidence. I wondered if it was a warning. That night, rain pressed against my windows, heavy and relentless. She came over late, coat damp, hair loose, eyes carrying too much. She didn't kiss me when she arrived. She sat instead, hands folded, posture too formal for our space. "They're noticing," she said. The words landed between us like a dropped glass. A board member asked me if I'd been distracted, she continued. HR wants to review team dynamics. I said nothing. Silence was my reflex. My shield. She looked at me then, not pleading, not demanding, but searching. If this becomes public, she asked quietly, would you still choose me? The rain outside grew louder, as if the sky itself leaned in to hear my answer. I didn't respond right away. Because choosing her meant risking everything, my job, my stability, the fragile peace I'd built for my daughter. It meant stepping back into a storm I'd sworn never to enter again. She watched my hesitation like a verdict. And in that moment, I realized the most dangerous thing about loving her wasn't the secret. It was the choice that was coming. The rain kept falling. And I knew, one way or another, something was about to break. That night, I sat on the edge of my daughter's bed long after her breathing slowed into sleep. Moonlight slipped through the curtains in thin silver lines, tracing the small rise and fall of her chest. Her hand was curled around her blanket, fingers clenched like she was holding onto something even in dreams. I brushed a strand of hair from her forehead and felt the familiar ache settle in my ribs, the ache of loving someone so much it rewrites fear. I had already lost once. A wife who stopped choosing us. A family dream that cracked quietly and then all at once. I remembered the night she left, how the apartment had sounded hollow afterward, how I learned to measure time in custody schedules and apologies that came too late. I remembered promising myself, right here in this same room, that I would never gamble stability again. That my daughter would never pay for my loneliness. I had meant it. But love doesn't ask permission. It arrives anyway, soft-footed, relentless, asking not what you can afford, but what you are willing to lose. I looked at my daughter and wondered what example I was setting. A man who hid from feeling? Or a man brave enough to choose truth even when it scared him? The question followed me into sleep and didn't loosen its grip by morning. The boardroom smelled like polished wood and restrained ambition. I took my seat at the long table, spine straight, hands steady, rehearsing neutrality like a prayer. Around me, murmurs rose and fell, quarterly numbers, expansion plans, rumors dressed as insights. She sat at the head of the table, composed, immaculate, untouchable. CEO. She didn't look at me. The meeting began like any other. Slides changed. Voices overlapped. Decisions were deferred. I answered when called on, kept my gaze fixed on data instead of memory. Then she stood. The room shifted. There was no dramatic pause, no flourish. Just a quiet inhale, like someone stepping to the edge of a cliff they'd been measuring for years. I have an announcement, she said. Something in her tone made my pulse stutter. She folded her hands in front of her, not defensive, not apologetic. Resolved. Effective immediately, she continued, I will be stepping down as CEO. Gasps rippled across the table. A pen clattered to the floor. Someone whispered her name like it was a mistake that could be corrected. I couldn't breathe. Stepping down wasn't just unexpected, it was unthinkable. She had built this company with a kind of ruthless grace. She was its spine, its compass. And yet, as voices rose in protest, she lifted one hand, not commanding, but calm. I know what this looks like, she said. But I've spent my life making choices that looked right on paper and felt empty in my chest. Her gaze finally lifted. It found me. Not as a subordinate. Not as a risk. But as a man she loved. I want something real, she said, voice steady even as the room held its breath. And I'm done hiding. Silence followed, not the fragile kind, but the stunned, seismic kind. The kind that redraws futures. Questions came after. Urgent. Strategic. afraid. She answered what she needed to and nothing more. Her decision stood, immovable. I sat frozen, heart hammering, knowing that whatever life I'd known before that moment was already over. The rooftop was cold when I found her later. Wind tugged at her hair, unstyled now, free. The city stretched beneath us, loud and indifferent, unaware that something fragile and brave had just been set loose above it. She stood near the edge, hands gripping the railing, knuckles pale. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked afraid. Not of headlines. Not of failure. Of choice. I approached slowly, as if sudden movement might shatter her resolve. When she turned, her eyes were bright, not with tears, but with something close to them. "I don't know who I am without that title," she admitted. "I've been her for so long." I stepped closer, close enough to feel the warmth she carried despite the wind. "I do," I said quietly. "You're the woman who learned to braid hair at midnight. The woman who listens to bedtime stories like they're sacred. The woman who walked away from power because she wanted truth." Her breath caught. I pulled her into my arms then, not urgently, not possessively, but with the certainty of someone who had already crossed the line fear had drawn. "You chose me," I whispered into her hair. She laughed softly, the sound breaking and beautiful all at once. Her arms tightened around me like she'd been holding herself together until now. "So did you," she said. The city kept moving below us. Cars honked. Lights blinked on and off. Somewhere, life went on exactly as it always had. But on that rooftop, with the wind pressing against us and the future suddenly terrifying and wide, something settled into place. Not certainty, but courage. She rested her forehead against my chest, eyes closed, as if memorizing the moment. I looked out at the skyline and wondered how many people were making choices like this, quiet, unphotographed, irreversible. I thought of my daughter sleeping peacefully, unaware that the shape of her world was shifting again. I thought of the risks ahead, judgment, instability, questions without easy answers. And I thought of the promise I'd made years ago, to protect what mattered most. Maybe protection didn't always mean staying still. Maybe sometimes it meant stepping forward, together. The wind howled softly, carrying our silence away. And for the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid of what morning might bring. The world did not end when she stepped down. It just became louder. Headlines sharpened their teeth. Opinions multiplied like storms on the horizon. Some called her brave. Others called her reckless. A few tried to turn her choice into a scandal with a face, and that face, inevitably, became mine. I learned how quickly a name could feel heavy. We stopped meeting in glass-walled restaurants and started choosing places with chipped mugs and mismatched chairs. Places where no one looked twice. Places where the waiters forgot your order but remembered your smile. She wore simple dresses now. I wore the same old jacket. We learned the geography of anonymity together. At night, when the city finally loosened its grip, we talked. Not about strategy or damage control, but about the quiet things, how fear sounded when it spoke honestly, how freedom felt unfamiliar on the tongue. She confessed she still reached for her phone at dawn, ready to check market updates that no longer belonged to her. I admitted I still counted minutes like debts, afraid time would ask for payment again. Love, it turned out, didn't erase old habits. It sat beside them, patient. The first time she came home with me after the announcement, my daughter was awake. She stood in the hallway, holding a crayon like a wand, eyes bright with questions she didn't yet know how to ask. The walls were covered with her drawings, houses with too many windows, suns smiling too wide. Evidence of a life still becoming. "This is," I started, then stopped. Titles rose to my lips and fell away. "This is my friend," I said. My daughter studied her carefully, the way children do, without agenda, without fear. Then she nodded once, satisfied, and returned to coloring as if the matter were settled. Later, in the kitchen, she exhaled a breath she'd been holding all evening. "I was terrified," she admitted. "I didn't know how to belong here." I took her hand, warm and steady. "You already do." She learned the rhythm of our days slowly. Morning chaos. Forgotten lunches. Shoes that vanished just when we needed them most. She laughed when milk spilled. She learned where I kept the extra keys and the quiet corners of my worry. One evening, she brought a small painting with her, nothing expensive, nothing famous. Just two figures walking under an umbrella, rain slanting around them like a curtain. "I thought of us," she said, setting it gently against the wall. Rain became our symbol after that. On days when doubt pressed too hard, we walked in it. Let it soak our clothes, blur our outlines. Let the world see us imperfect and moving forward anyway. Not everyone approved. At work, my position became complicated. Conversations stalled when I entered rooms. Promotions drifted out of reach like mirages. I was offered quiet exits and louder warnings. Stability trembled. Some nights, fear crept back in. I'd watch my daughter sleep, the same way I always had, and wonder if I'd mistaken courage for selfishness. If choosing love had been a luxury I couldn't afford. She sensed it before I spoke. One night, she placed a letter on the table between us. Handwritten. "Careful. If this costs you too much," it read, "I will understand." My chest tightened. I folded the letter and shook my head. "Don't write your way out of my life," I said softly. She didn't argue. She just reached across the table and held my hand like a promise she intended to keep. The rumors faded eventually, replaced by newer noise, newer scandals. The world moved on the way it always does, hungry, distracted. What remained were the small things, shared groceries, shared silences, shared mornings where coffee tasted like choice. One afternoon, my daughter handed her a drawing. 3 figures this time. Under one roof. She didn't say anything. She just smiled and pressed the paper to her chest as if it were a medal. That night, as rain tapped gently against the windows, she leaned into me and whispered, "I don't miss the title." I kissed her hair and believed her. But even without titles, love asks its own questions. And somewhere beyond the rain, a future waited, uncertain, watching, ready to demand an answer we hadn't yet learned how to give. Mornings used to scare me. They carried consequences. They asked for decisions made in the dark to stand up in daylight. They were where promises were tested, where people either stayed or slowly disappeared behind excuses. But that morning arrived quietly. No headlines. No knocking fear. Just light. Sunrise spilled across the kitchen floor in soft gold, catching dust in the air like floating memories. The coffee machine hummed its familiar song, steady and patient. She stood by the counter, barefoot, wearing my old shirt, the same one from the beginning, sleeves still too long, collar still holding my shape. Some things didn't need to change to mean something new. I watched her without speaking. Watched the way she leaned her hip against the counter, the way she closed her eyes for half a second when she inhaled the coffee's steam, like she was reminding herself she was real, that this life was not borrowed. She noticed me watching. "You're thinking again," she said gently. "I always do in the mornings." She turned, holding out a cup. "Then sit. Think with coffee." We sat at the small table, the one with the wobbling leg I'd never fixed because life had always felt temporary before. Sunlight framed her face, softer than any boardroom glow, more honest than any spotlight. My daughter padded in moments later, hair wild, sleep still clinging to her eyelashes. She stopped when she saw her. Not startled. Not confused. Just thoughtful. "Did you stay?" she asked. The question was simple. The answer was everything. She crouched to my daughter's level, eyes warm, voice steady. "Yes. I stayed." My daughter nodded once, as if confirming a theory she'd been developing for a while. Then she climbed into the empty chair and reached for her cereal like this was how mornings were supposed to look. I felt something loosen in my chest. Later, after backpacks and shoes and rushed goodbyes, the apartment fell into that rare quiet reserved for shared peace. She helped me wash dishes we hadn't dirtied much. Water splashed. Laughter slipped out unplanned. "You know," she said, "I used to wake up to assistants and schedules. And now? And now I wake up to coffee and questions." She smiled. "I like this better. But even peace has shadows." The phone rang more than it used to. Job offers came wrapped in careful language, opportunities that required distance, silence, sacrifice. Stability dangled itself in front of me like a test. One evening, I found her on the balcony, holding the old painting, the one with the umbrella. Rain streaked down the glass behind her, blurring the city into watercolor again. "They want you to choose," she said without turning. "So do you," I replied. She nodded. "But not like that." I stepped behind her, resting my forehead against hers. We stood there, breathing the same air, listening to rain tell its ancient story of falling and returning. "I won't leave," I said finally. "Not you. Not her. Not this." She closed her eyes, and this time, she did cry. Not because she was afraid, but because she believed me. Weeks passed. Then months. Life didn't become perfect. It became honest. I took a smaller role. Less money. More time. We learned to budget laughter into quiet evenings and measure success in shared dinners and unfinished conversations. She found work that mattered, not because it impressed, but because it healed. One night, my daughter fell asleep between us during a movie she didn't finish. Her small hand rested in mine. The credits rolled unnoticed. She looked at me then, really looked. "You didn't just choose me," she said. "You chose us." I thought of the man I'd been, the one who disappeared into responsibility, who thought love was a risk he couldn't afford. I thought of mornings spent alone, coffee tasting like survival instead of hope. "I think," I said slowly, "I finally learned that love isn't the thing that breaks you." She smiled through tears. "It's the thing that stays." Outside, the rain stopped. Clouds parted. The city lights sharpened again. And for the first time in a long while, morning didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a promise. She reached for my hand. I held it. We stayed.